Hi there. About a year ago I made a tutorial on how to patch the Korg MS-10 and it seems to have been appreciated by all the viewers, and I've been thinking about making a part 2 for a while, but haven't really gotten around to. But now I have. I've been making this the filming today, and I just felt I needed an introduction video, so that's what this is. It's an introduction video. But let's patch into that hole. Okay, let's start talking about this trigger input here. I saw a clip on YouTube by another user called Johannes914. It's a pretty old clip. He uploaded it in 2007 and he calls it the poor man's sequencer. And I'm not really trying to steal what he's doing, but I got an idea from that, and I feel like I also need to show what he did first. His clip is a lot more has a lot more effects and more melodic stuff, and I'm just going to show you the basics here. But to get some background information, the keyboard is also illustrated on this patch bay here. So the keyboard has an arrow to the trigger detector, which means that you press a key down, there's a trigger detector, and then there's a little arrow here going to, well, the trigger out, if you want to send this trigger to something else. Then through the, passes by the trigger in hole, and then goes to the envelope generator, and then of course go to the voltage controlled amplifier. So basically you press a note, it goes to the trigger detector, and then through the envelope, and then you have the sound that you're making. But since you can actually plug something into the trigger in, you can bypass the keyboard and the trigger detector, and you can automize, or you can actually trigger externally when this is supposed to make a beep or something. Fortunately, we also have something that can generate a trigger signal, which is the square wave waveform from the modulation generator. So if we just plug that from the output of that to the input here, we are going to hear the sound that it's set right now. And this is a sawtooth wave. It's a fully open filter. It's a short envelope. So that's cool. That's basically what the poor man's sequencer is. I'm gonna turn this into a bit of something else. This is not very useful. I was thinking, sure, this is a cool rhythm. What can you use that for? Well, a bass kick would be better, not a... You can of course play a bass, and that's exactly what this guy is doing in this clip, and he's putting effects on and all that. It sounds really cool. That's not what I'm gonna do, because I don't want to copy his stuff. But I want to turn this into a bass kick. So I'm not sure if you are into sound design, but a bass kick would be a drop of, well, something like a sine wave or something else quickly in the lower frequency regions. So I'm going to put this to a pulse width waveform, and then pull it up so it actually has no width at all. Then you turn up the resonance fully, and you turn this down, and you will actually have a self-oscillating sine wave. So there you go. We got something that's in the ballpark of a kick. But of course, we need some sort of a fast drop on this to create a better attack of a bass kick. So we pull up the envelope generator for the frequency, which means that we basically have a filter envelope. And there you go. We've got some sort of a kick going on here. There we go. So here we have a bass kick instead. And this is cool. You can use this as some sort of background rhythm track for something. But I was then curious about what can you actually use in the trigger hole. Like what could you output into that? This is obvious. A square wave, it's obvious. I was thinking, how about the modulation wheel? But that's a range of a voltage, and it's right now it's actually, well, you know what? I'm gonna do this. There we go. Right now it's plugged into the modulation output and it's on 0, so it's not really making anything at all. Somehow this is triggering, holding the key down anyway, I think, for some reason. So it's making the low frequency humming based on the sine wave here. But if you pull this up and then pull it down, you trigger it. It's probably the sustain level that actually makes this sound right now. So you can trigger it by dropping from 5 volts to something below, and I guess that's the trigger value for the trigger in. Not very useful, but of course we always have the split cable, or the Y cable. It goes from 1 to 2, so let's see what we can do here. Of course, I'm interested in trying to use random things, because that's when weird things happen. So I tried using the pink noise. That doesn't do anything unless you also combine it with the modulation output, or the modulation wheel output. And look what happens when you pull this up. Somehow the modulation wheel output helps boosting the pink noise output to some sort of peak level that some of the random peaks of the noise is enough to trigger, which is pretty cool. So now we have a randomized kick going on. It's an interesting thing to have randomized things happening. But of course, this is not enough. We want to destroy the sound more, right? So let's put some white noise into the external in and pull up the external signal, and everything sounds broken, which I love. It's such a raw and analog sound. It's just, I like these types of sounds. So yeah, that's that. After I recorded the first part of this tutorial last year, in 2015, one of the users called Alex, or Alex, he commented mentioning a little idea, and I had no idea this is possible to do. It seems like some sort of a bug, but it's cool enough to show you. Not very useful, but it seems like a bug. Or it seems like I'm not sure why this is actually working, but we have a regular sawtooth here, open filter, nothing else. We're gonna open, I mean, this Alex guy describes this in the comments on my first video, so it's all credits to him. Thank you very much. But I think it's cool, and I wanted to make a variation of it too, to see what's going on. So if we turn up the internal modulation generator of the cutoff frequency, we get this little sweeping sound going on. What he suggests, you plug the output of the modulation wheel to the output triangle of the modulation generator. And suddenly the modulation wheel affects the filter somehow. I cannot explain this, but it seems to work for him and it seems to work for me. So it's not just like one synthesizer that's modified or that's broken or something like that. It seems like it's something that you can do on at least two MS-10s. So I'm thinking this is some sort of design flaw of the circuitry or something. I don't know. I know absolutely nothing about electronics and electricity and soldering and all that. So I just think it's interesting that two outputs actually has an effect. Of course, I need to try this with a Y cable or a split cable just to see what else can actually go into this triangle. What's actually going in? I mean, it's supposed to go both going out, but I tried this one. And of course, you do hear the little noise going on there as well. The modulation wheel still has the same effect, but it's actually mixed somehow with the noise generator. So now we actually have three outputs affecting the filter. It seems like, I don't know, it just affects the filter. It's funny. It's funny. Well, thanks for that, Alex. Good comment. I found it very amusing that it actually worked. So thank you. Okay, let's talk about the keyboard out hole. As I said before, the keyboard generates a signal to the trigger detector that goes all the way into the envelope generator and then out to the amplifier. But the keyboard also outputs to the keyboard out. So whenever you press something here, stuff comes out of this hole. So what can you do with that? Well, that goes from 0 to 8 volts. I guess it needs a bigger range because there are a lot of keys and well, I have no idea actually. But if we plug the keyboard out into the cutoff frequency, right now I do have a sawtooth and it is a fully open filter. Now we don't have any resonance either, so if we compare these, this is a fully open filter. This connection doesn't do anything yet because I have to move a knob as well. That's why that seems weird right now. But this is just a fully open filter. If I pull down the frequency of the cutoff of the filter, you hear that it completely closes down, and you don't really hear much of the tone anymore. But since this is plugged in, and the cutoff frequency modulation can be used through the external, we pull that up, compare that to this. That means that this note will keep the filter setting here on the lowest, but this one is gonna go to wherever, I think fully open, maybe fully open filter maybe. So each key on this keyboard in that direction will open the filter more. So you would actually be doing this if you're supposed to do this manually. But with this plugged in, it opens with the keyboard. It's also called keyboard tracking on some other synthesizers, and it's useful sometimes for modulations and stuff. You could use it for the frequency instead. And of course we need to use this knob. The problem is that it completely messes up the frequency, the intervals between each note, so that sounds horrible. So, and of course, since when we don't have this plugged in, this knob here is gonna use the generator, so it's actually putting a bit of a envelope onto the frequency right now. That's why it sounds like it's still moving. Pull that down, it's fine. But when we plug this in, it takes the keyboard output and puts that into the cutoff frequency. Oh, I'm sorry, the frequency, of course, of the pitch. And suddenly we just completely messes up the frequency. So whatever interval of voltage it is between two notes, that's also going to affect the pitch of the tone. So that goes crazy. But that's what the keyboard out can do. It also can, you can actually plug this out to another external synthesizer, of course, since it's just a regular output. And I don't know, use it to control something on another synthesizer. Have fun with that. Let's talk a little bit about MIDI connectivity with the MS-10. In my first video I made a year ago, I touched this very, very briefly. I just mentioned that I had an external box that I used to control this through MIDI. But I didn't really tell you anything about that, how that works, or how to think when you're supposed to get that type of gear. So if you do not have a box that lets you control the Korg MS-10 through MIDI from your DAW or from your external digital sequencer or something like that, then this is for you. This part here. Let me just plug this out. We've talked about basically every hole or every input and output on this now. We haven't talked about the trigger out very much, but not interesting. The CV in, the control voltage in, the control voltage is what creates the pitch of the tone. The trigger in is when and how long it's gonna sound, which is also called gate. It's actually mostly gate nowadays. Trigger is probably some old word that was used when this was in production. Or it's just Korg's own terminology about that. But nowadays it's usually called gate, and when you're supposed to talk about this and the get gear, you're supposed to search for MIDI to CV gate stuff. And it's completely possible to control this via MIDI in a very, very good way. I do have a Kenton USB solo box that I bought. It's not the first box I bought for this, but it's the one that I like better. I've also tried, the first thing I tried was the Dupfer, what is it called? It's called, let's check out. I think it's called the MCV, yeah, MCV4. So the MCV4 from Dupfer is one MIDI to CV box. It's around €100, I think. To me, when I first wanted to control this via MIDI, I didn't really have much more than $100, and I thought that was too much as well. But I did buy that one, and it's not optimal at all for this synthesizer. This is getting technical, and I'm not technical, so I can't explain this in a very good way, but the type of voltage that comes in here, since you're supposed to control pitch with it, the intervals between each note has to be some sort of standard. So whatever is sending CV needs to send the proper voltage for a C to be a C, and an F to be an F, and a G to be a G, you know. And there are, from what I understand, two types of standards of currents, and there is the one that the Doppler MCV4 sends doesn't really comply with this synthesizer very well. And the Kenton USB solo box, or there's another Kenton box as well that is not USB, that's just regular Midi input. You can actually set what type of output, what type of the interval between the notes it's supposed to output. So those two boxes are a lot more useful if you're controlling synthesizers of the vintage stuff. So I do have a Kenton USB solo, and I have two cables here. This I have written CV on it, so that goes into the CV in, so it goes from the CV out on my box. This is called gate, so that goes into the trigger in. Start some sort of sequencer to play. So I do have a sequence running. So I use Cubase, and I have a little bit of a MIDI sequence made by some sort of MIDI insert plug called the Step Designer. And I have that on a track that is muted right now, but there we go, it's now unmuted. So this is kind of a TB303 type of sequence that I've made. And if I plug out the trigger, nothing happens. And if you take out the CV, it triggers on the last note that was triggered. So that's interesting. So you can, so the triggers is just a trigger. But then when that's plugged in, you actually get the proper note from the MIDI translated into CV, and it works very, very nicely with this type of machine. So this is a very TB303 type of a pattern that I made. Actually sounds pretty good with square wave as well. For some reason, trying to create TB303 patterns with other synthesizers seems to be popular. Probably because they're so damn expensive, unless you buy a clone. I do have a TB303 as well, so I kind of know what it's supposed to sound like. And to get this sequence to actually sound proper, you have to mess around with the gate length for the notes and also the envelope generator. You can easily get this to sound nothing at all like a TB303, because it has to do with the filter settings and the range of all this. So I think this is in the ballpark. Just to make this more interesting, let's use the best distortion pedal for the 303. So I plug that out, that box instead, and plug this into the. So now we have a distortion going on here as well. And it sounds pretty much like a TB303. Well, no it doesn't. My choice of buying the Kenton USB Solo is a good choice. Don't buy the Doppler MS or MCV4 if you're gonna try to hook up an MS-10 or an MS-20. It doesn't work. It does work actually, but it doesn't work very well. And why it doesn't work well, I will explain to you now. Since the CV from the Kenton box that I have sends out the proper type of signal, this is the normal input where you're supposed to connect it. But if you connect it through the other standard, I can't tell you what type of standard that is, but it's wrong. You have to plug, if let's say this is coming from a Doppler box instead, you will have to plug it into the frequency. You remember the control voltage will control the pitch, so will the frequency, but you will have to plug that one into that box into this hole instead, and then use this to tune it with, because wherever this setting is set to, it's gonna be eliminating the synthesizer from that signal, and it's very tedious. Plus, you lose the connection of using the frequency input for other modulations. So, plus it's a pain in the ass to try to intonate it. It just never really goes into the proper tuning. It can be used in smaller ranges of notes, but it just doesn't really work properly. So I definitely say go for a Kenton USB Solo or the Kenton Pro other box that takes real MIDI instead. Much better choice. That's it for now. Bye.